Hello everyone, welcome to Code Again. Thanks so much. Today we're going to be doing Lesson 3 in Beginner VBA. We're going to be talking about testing conditions in VBA. So again, this is video number 3. Check the description down below. I'll have links to videos 1 and 2. We're going to be looking at testing other conditions in VBA using the switch command, which includes a warning, the immediate if command, which also includes a warning, and then the select case statement. So let's go ahead and get started. In case you're kind of curious as to where we're at, what we're doing, so there are two sides to VBA. You have to remember there's the common syntax, which we're going over today. This is the normal code that you can generally use between all Office applications. There are a couple of minor exceptions. And then you have the object model syntax, which is very specific to the application you're looking for or that you're using. So for instance, if you're in Word, you're going to have a Word object model, an Access object model, Excel object model, PowerPoint object model, etc. So today we're looking again at the common syntax. So this is usable throughout all of the VBA applications. Now switching over to our code module, this may look scary if you're new to coding, but don't worry, I'll walk you through the setup really quick just so you know what's going on. First, we're going to test out the switch function. Now, remember I said function that returns a value, and I've written a little module here called test SW for test switch. Now, I just happen to have two windows open here. This window is our main code for testing the switch function, and over here I have three just minor little test functions and then one subroutine. So if you don't remember, a function returns a value. So when I refer to the function R1 in code elsewhere, it's going to return a string, which is what this dollar sign means. I could have easily typed it as R1 as string like this. This is just the shorthand way of doing that. So I've got three functions, R1, R2, and R3. All of these do the same thing. They set the function equal to either R1, R2, or R3, and they print the fact that this function was ran. And then I have a subroutine. Now remember, subs do not return values. They just do things. And so all he's going to do is debug.print R4. So again, these return a string when they're called in code. When R2 is called, it returns a string value. So does R3 and R1. R4 does not. So now that these are going to be the same throughout all the examples. So now let's look at this main code over here. This test switch, remember, this switch function has our first warning. So I have a little note here that says it does not short circuit. And if you don't know what that means, you're about to find out. So how does switch work? Well, it sets a variable to the result of the first true condition of the switch. And now it doesn't normally have a catch-all situation, but you can use something like 1 equals 1 as your final condition check. And then here's how you use it. Switch, or actually I will do something like variable equals, because switch is a function. And how do we know it's a function? See how it has parentheses surrounding it. So switch, after switch is run, will return a value to this variable over here. So let's walk through this code and we're going to see how this works. So first I give myself some variables, x as long, comma, y. This is the shorthand for as long. So instead of doing as long, I can do an ampersand. Dim double s as string. This is the shorthand for string, double s2. Just put the dollar sign after it. Dim VSW as variant. If I want a variant, I don't have to say as variant. I can just do this. But if I want to be more clear, I can say variant. Now, a variant can be anything. It just depends on what's happening. Now, after I declare those variables, here's what I do next. I just set some values. I initialize some of these variables. I say x equals 1, and I use the little trick with the colon, which means I'm going to do another instruction. You could easily have done this right here if I didn't mind all the lines. This is equivalent to doing this. Oops. Don't forget the colon. So x equals 1, y equals 2, double s is first, double s2 is last. So I initialize these variables. Now I'm going to set my VSW, which is a variant, equal to switch, and then I start testing conditions. I can use an or an and in here. I could have just said x equals 2, comma, R1, etc. So how do we read this? So VSW equals, if x equals 2, then VSW will equal R1, which is the string R1. If Now, if that's true, it'll just be equal to R1. If y equals 1, it would equal R2. If double S equals equals last, it'll equal WR3. And here's my catch-all. If 1 equals 1, R4. Now, do you see what could be a problem here? So let's run this, and let's find out what our first problem is. You've got 5 more seconds to guess. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, expected function or variable. Why is it saying that? Well, look, it's highlighting R4. Remember, these functions, R1, 2, and 3, are returning a variable, or returning a value, and switch is a function itself. So we're trying to set VSW to some value. Well, R4 does not return a value because it is a subroutine. So we cannot use R4 here. So let's put R1. So how does this read? If X equals 2, then VSW is R1. If Y equals 1, VSW is R2, etc., etc. So what do you think, looking at this code, VSW will be set to? What value will VSW be set to? Well, check it out. Let's see what happens when we run this code. Now this is interesting. Look at this. Now VSW is set to the value of R1 because this is the only condition in the switch statement that is true. However, it ran R1, R2, and R3, even though it set it to R1. It ran all of these, actually, and it ran R1 again. There you have the second run of R1. So it ran all of these functions even though this condition was not true. That's why I say it does not short circuit, meaning if it finds this true condition, or if it finds this false condition, it's still going to run this function. It does not short circuit that and jump to the next condition check. So you have to be very careful, because some of these functions could do all kinds of different things. Or you could return a null value. If you don't know what a null is, I'll have an upcoming video on that. That's more for Access people. But if you're in Excel and you're going to dabble with Access, you need to know what null means. Again, that's a future video. So we have to be very careful when we're using switch. For instance, let's set this first condition to true. You're thinking, oh, well, if the first condition was true, it wouldn't run all of these things. Oh, really? So let's run this again. So let's look at our logic. X equals 1. That is true. So it should set VSW equal to R1 and stop. Correct? Incorrect. It still runs every single function in the switch routine, even though it should have stopped right here. So that's one of the cautions with the switch function. It's very useful, but I would be very cautious when you're using it for functions. What it's really good for is stuff like this, when we set things to just explicit values. So switch X equals 2, then VSW is 2. Or if Y equals 1, then it's 1. Or if double S equals first, it's 1. So when we do that, then we know that VSW is going to equal 1. This is very short and concise. You don't need if then, if then, if then. You can do it all in one line, and it's pretty easy to read as long as they're very short condition checks. Now our next function is the immediate if. This also comes with a warning because, as you can see here, we're in the immediate if function. It does not short circuit. Now what is this useful for? This is to quickly test usually one condition and return a default if that condition is not met. You can nest immediate ifs just like you can nest switch and pretty much anything else. And here's the usage. Variable equals immediate if. Now again, notice the parentheses here that tells us immediate if is a function that is returning a value. So the usage is immediate if, check the condition. If true, if that condition is true, this is what the variable is set to. Otherwise, it is set to this. So again, I have initialized my variables here. X equals 1, Y equals 2, etc. VSW equals immediate if, and then I'm going to check. Does X equal 2? No, it doesn't. So VSW should be set to the value of R1. Now, what do you think is going to happen when I run this subroutine? So test immediate if. Do you think R1 will run because X is not equals 2, so it should jump to this, right? No, it doesn't. It will run both functions again, so you have to be very careful with both immediate if and the switch statement because they do not short circuit code. So if you have functions, etc. Now this is a special warning for Access people because a lot of times you will be using code in Access, and you have to deal with null values, and that can really ruin your day. So if you were doing something like this, if you said VFW equals immediate if x equals to R1, I'm sorry, let's see, R null R2. So let's say you did something like this, and this might return a null because of the condition of your code. You would be thinking, oh, well, x does not equal 2, so it should jump. No, it won't. It will return a null here, and that will error out your code. So you have to be very careful when you're dealing with nulls. Again, null will be a future video with the NZ function. And that's pretty much it for immediate if. It's really easy. It's really great to use when you need a quick one-liner. So for instance, VSW equals if x equals 2, true, false, something like that. Or maybe explicit values. You could say, well, if x equals 2, then it's 2, otherwise it's 1. Super, super easy. But again, because we check for functions, immediate if does not short circuit. Now we're going to test our last condition statement of the night, and that is select case. Now this is not a function. This is kind of like variable code execution. So let's look at our screen here. We have our variables as before, but notice this. On a select case, I'm selecting one of the variables to test. In this case, it is x. So select case x. So I want to see what the value of x is. And then I say case 2, run this code. Case 10, run this code. Case 1 or 5, run this code. And then here is a catch-all called case else, VSWs equals happy days. Now, notice I have in the notes up here, this does short circuit, which means if this case statement is false, it will not run R1. If this case statement is false, it will not run R3. So if we type test case, what do you think the results will be for VSW? Notice x equals 1. This case was true, so VSW R2 did run, and then VSW was set to R2. None of these other functions up here ran, so we were able to short circuit our code. Now sometimes if you do something strange, like if you were to run a function like this, that will still run. So watch this. Uh-oh. Oh, oops, type mismatch. R1 is a string, so I can't assess it to a number. Now you have to be very careful. If you do a case statement that includes something that may run, it will not short circuit. So it's only on explicit tests will it short circuit the action, the code under the case. However, if you do a function here, it will not short circuit. Now online, you may see examples of select case true, and then they do some weird things with the case statement. So they literally do select case true. Now that is a weird way to actually short circuit the select case statement. I don't like using it because it's hard to read. It does make sense, but it's just really hard to read. I like to just do this and just be careful on your case statements. You don't use something as a weird function, case, 2. Now you have to be careful that you don't repeat your cases. So for instance, if case equals 1 on x, well, it's going to stop at R1. That was the first case that was true. Typically you want to test unique case situations here. And then you can have a case else down here. So for instance, if I'm going to set x equals to 11, all of these case statements should fail. That way my VSW equals happy days as a string value. And just in case you missed episode 2, we're going to look at the if statement very quick. Here's how you do the same very thing as an if statement. And again, because we're testing explicit values, this will short circuit under normal conditions. So if we run test if, R3 ran because we have an else here. None of these other conditions were true. X is not equal to 2 and Y is not equal to 1. Now you may be wondering, well, this looks very similar to select case. Look at if. If is able to test multiple different conditions. So here I tested X. Then, if that's not true, then I test Y. whereas select case, I'm only testing the condition of X, but it may have multiple cases. So that's kind of a tweak you can use between select case and if-then statements. Thanks so much. That's really the end of this video. Short, sweet, and to the point. Again, if you find this useful, comment below if you like it. Ask me any questions, and I'll try to follow up in another video or answer you directly. Thanks so much. Have a great day, and God bless.